you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Valuations Podcast brought to you by Truelytics, the premier transition management platform for the wealth management industry. My name is Mike Langford and I'm the host of the Valuations Podcast. And this week I'm joined by Kelli Cruz of the Cruz Consulting Group. And Kelli and her team are the premier talent wealth consulting firm for the wealth management industry. And this is going to be a really interesting podcast for you. I know you're going to love it because we spend a lot of time in this business talking about how relationships matter. It's a people business, right? Everything is about the relationships. And when you start to think about the valuation of your business, what somebody might be buying in the future as you transition your business either to an external buyer or an internal team member or set of team members who are going to acquire the business and carry on the torch, if you will. Those people matter to the viability of the business, right? Not just their intellectual firepower, but their relationships, their style, the things that they bring to the table. Because, at the end of the day, that's what people are buying. They're buying the relationships you have with your clients. And of course, the money that comes with the assets under management that are with your team, but also they're buying the talent you have in the organization. So talent is really, really important. So I know you're going to love this episode. Kelli and I cover a lot of ground. We talk about some potential disasters averted, and those disasters were averted by having high quality talent who knew how to handle certain situations. And we talk about the value that having high quality people in your organization, training them well, treating them well, and keeping them in the organization long term, all that value that can bring to an organization. And she's got some really good stories to share in that regard. So without further ado, here's Kelli. Let's do this. Well, hello, Kelli. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you. I've been really looking forward to having you on the show for about a month or so now since we first started chatting. And Carla introduced us. I'm like, oh, she's going to be wonderful for the show because this is an area of the business that you focus on is something that's near and dear to my heart as well. And it's that, as you referred to it, it's that human capital element of the business. And I'm really excited to dive into everything about that and from your perspective and why you think it's so valuable. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mike, so much. I'm excited to have the conversation today.
It's going to be great. So I like to do like a little bit of an IMDb, as I called it. And it's funny, before we clicked the record button, we were chatting a little bit about Game of Thrones, right? And if you're like me, when you watch Game of Thrones, and which was the finale was last night, when you watch Game of Thrones or other movies, you inevitably pull up your iPhone or whatever, and you're looking at IMDb, like, who's that guy or who's that lady? What else has she or he been in? That type of stuff. You're looking through their history, right? And I kind of look at this intro part of like, let's go through your IMDb and talk a little bit about like how you came to found the Cruz Consulting Group, what inspired you to do it, and what were some of the stops along the way. So why don't we kick off there? So
Sure.
How'd you get here, Kelli?
Absolutely. And I use the app and yes, big Game of Thrones fan and disappointed on the last episode. We can talk about that later. We can do a whole nother podcast on Game of Thrones.
Exactly.
I started out really in human resources management. And so I'm going to call it human resources management and then how I transitioned into human capital or talent wealth management. And so my background is very traditional HR. And I did that at Wells Fargo and had a great career there. My last role was managing HR on the private client services side for about 5,000 employees. And I had 35 HR generalists reporting into me. So I feel like one of the things that differentiates my perspective on the industry is that I have this really deep-rooted background and knowledge of talent management. And so I come at my solutions and the perspective I have on the industry really from that background. And from there, I actually went to work for Schwab Advisor Services. And that's when I first got a very up close and personal glimpse at the independent registered investment advisor. And so that I was not in an HR role at Schwab. I was developing practice management solutions for advisors, and specifically they hired me to develop a human capital offering. So from there, I kind of expanded. I was responsible for their student education, bridging, if you will, students that are in PFP, personal financial planning programs, to the industry. And some other work that I did there. Got kind of interested in research. So I worked on the first benchmark study that Schwab did with their clients, and decided to go to work for Investment News, big publication for our industry, and start up their research group. They had purchased the Moss Adams research studies. And so I took that over and ran that for about 3.5 years, started doing some consulting. I had done some consulting with advisors at Schwab and decided to start my own consulting practice. So sometimes how I describe it is that I always knew that I wanted to do consulting, somewhere down the line in my career. And I feel like the move from Schwab to Investment News, which was a much smaller organization, was a little bit of breaking away before I launched into, being completely independent and owning my own practice. So the other perspective I do bring to my clients is understanding some of the challenges they have running a small business, because I run a small business myself. And I'm doing the work that I love. Realized, a career goal, which was to do the consulting, and feel really, really fortunate every day to be able to work with this industry. I believe in what, advisors do for their end clients. I think it's a very noble profession, if you will. I put it right up there with healthcare, because in life, if you don't have good health or if you don't have financial independence, you can't live the life you want to. So for me, it's just a real pleasure to be able to, help advisory firms with something that is so important to the business model, but yet not probably something they thought they would have to be doing when they, joined on or started their own firm, which was to be, a human resources manager, so to speak.
That's really interesting. I'm glad you covered the connection you have, the empathy you're able to have, because you're a small business owner running a business that in many ways structurally looks like what the independent advisor has, right? Even if they have a shop that has, 5 to 10 other advisors working there, it's a very similar business to yours, right? They're having to think about a lot of the same things that you have. And like you mentioned, some of the stuff's a surprise, right? Like when I always joke about, I left Fidelity Investments and went out on my own. And the things that caught me by surprise are the things like office supplies. Like, oh, we're out of paper. Oh, somebody forgot to order paper. I got to get paper. It's like, there's these little things that are suddenly all you, bro. And
you can't blame anybody else for not having the paper, right? Because you forgot to order it. It's very true. I do find it's interesting because some of the compensation mistakes I see advisory firms make, I can understand running my own business and having, 1099 and W-2 employees and what that difference means and how to compensate. I mean, I really can relate. And so with many, if not all of the solutions I come up with, they're tried and true. I either experienced it as a manager myself, as an employee myself, or as a business owner. So I feel like I'm practical about what's going to work and what isn't, and then being able to sort of customize that to the unique situation each firm may be dealing with.
That's really smart. Anytime I've done any speaking in the industry, I've noticed like there's an amazing connection where you can talk to people and let them know you've walked a mile in your shoes, right? Like I have been where you are. I've experienced some of the same thing you've experienced, and you'll see the heads nodding in the audience, right? Like, oh yeah, I'm going through that pain right now, or I've experienced that challenge that you're talking about, and it makes you much more capable to serve your audience. Really quickly, question for you. Why is talent acquisition and development something that they should take seriously, right? Because I think we often hear that phrase, this is a relationship-based business, or that firms use human connection language to describe how they stand out from their competition, right? If you ever go to an advisor's website or an RIA firm's website, a lot of the language, say, oh, we care about our clients, we put your needs first, and a lot of that type of stuff. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about like why the people aspect of the business, both externally and kind of internally for the organization, is so important. Something they should take seriously.
Sure. I think that's a great question. Well, in a lot of the writing and speaking I talk about what I call the secret sauce of their business model, and it's really what you mentioned. It's around the relationship that each one has with their clients. And I have this very firm belief that it takes a village, and everyone in the firm touches a client in some way, shape, or form. Some in a much larger capacity, like your lead advisors, the senior advisors providing advice and planning. And maybe to a lesser extent, that admin assistant who's helping you get all this done, but doesn't have as much interaction, but they still have interaction with the client, and they help create the experience that clients come to trust and rely on. And, I have this story that I'll tell you that I think really emphasizes this. And it also gets to the heart of why I really believe in the business model and what you're all doing for your clients. And that is that when my brother-in-law, it's been about 7 or 8 years now, passed away very unexpectedly at 69 years old. He was in the hospital. They actually misdiagnosed him, unfortunately, and it led to his death. And this all unfolded very quickly in the hospital over just a couple of days. And I was there with my sister and other family members with her on the last day of his life. And we didn't know that was going to be the last day of his life, but it ended up being the case. And some decisions needed to be made. And when he finally did pass that day, she turned to me and she said, I need you to call Rich. Now, I happen to know who Rich is, I should say. And Rich was a family friend and their financial advisor. And I looked at her, we're in the hall of this hospital. And I said, Sherry, that's my sister's name. Why do you want me to call Rich? And she said, well, first of all, he needs to know, but I need to talk to him. I know ahead of me over the next week, I have a lot of financial expenses, and I need to make sure I have money in the right place to cover it. And I said, no, don't worry. I got you covered. You don't need to worry about that right now. We'll get it all figured out. And she said, no, I need to talk to him as soon as possible. That was one of the first people that she wanted to talk to because she knew that he was going to help her navigate what was coming and what was happening. And my sister's a very fiercely independent person, still is. And it wasn't that she worried necessarily that she didn't have the money, because she knew it was somewhere in the different accounts that they had, but she just needed that sense of security. And that's part of her extended family, are the people that work at that firm that have worked with them for years. She also, separately from her husband, had a relationship with the advisor and the folks there. So I tell that story because you're who people turn to, and every person in the firm creates that relationship that to me is really the secret sauce. People don't want to just talk to anybody when they're talking to you about their financial issues, about their financial needs in these kind of life moments that are really quite significant, obviously. And having that trusted advisor makes a big difference. And it isn't just the advisor, it's the person answering the phone, it's the person doing the scheduling. So for me, it just is super important to make sure that your approach to the people in your firm, I call them your most important asset, because it's really at the heart of the business model.
That is an incredibly powerful story. I mean, and I imagine that resonates incredibly well with anyone that you share it with. What's interesting to me, you mentioned a couple of times, and kind of teeing that up, that that the person who answers the phone, the executive assistant, however you want to refer to that person, is important in this chain. Well, in this situation, that person, if they were underdeveloped and didn't show the right amount of empathy and didn't make this an extreme priority on the advisor's calendar, that, hey, one of their clients is calling and they have an emergency in their family, this needs to get put to the top of your agenda today, that you talk to her, that's a real easy way to lose the trust of a client, even though you, the advisor, may have done nothing wrong, right? It's that person you had in your organization fumbled the football, if you will, for a sports analogy there. And to me, that's a real easy way of teeing up. Like, this is really important. The people that you put in your business are just as valuable to the business as you are, and the actual the assets under management that you have in the business.
And you're absolutely right. In this case, I got her name is LaDonna. I got her and spoke to her and explained the situation. She was extremely upset also because she knew my brother-in-law, and I went back to my sister and I said, I spoke to her and she'll get a message to Rich as soon as possible. And she had all this confidence. She's like, oh, that's great. I know her. She'll track him down. To your exact point, it was like, okay, he didn't answer the phone, but the person that did, she had the utmost confidence in as well. And again, getting back to, well, okay, so why is this so important? In my past career, I worked for a products company. I worked for the Clorox company, and people are very important there. But a lot of the technology and the resource and the investment were in, frankly, when I was there anyway, the plastic that went into the bottle of bleach and making it recyclable and some other things. And the people component, although was important, it wasn't the main primary asset. It was the bleach and the formula for the bleach and the bottle and all the other product lines that they had. And so that's the distinction that I see in my mind is in this business and the advisory business, largely what you do is being delivered by the relationship you have with your clients.
That's fantastic. Well, keenly aware anytime I bring somebody on who's a consultant or service provider to the industry that I don't want them to give away their secret sauce, right? So I'm not going to ask you any questions that ask you to reveal the formula for success, if you will, for your clients. But I think it's valuable for the listener and maybe for yourself to share some of what you see as the core fundamentals to shifting a firm's mindset or an independent advisor's mindset from viewing talent as an expense to be managed to an asset to be invested in, right? I love the way you describe employees on your website as talent. I also love that you have a mission of getting firms to view their talent as a priceless asset. So I think it'd be really kind of fun to dive in on that and explore a couple of maybe high-level fundamentals of what you think are really key to helping somebody create a genuine mind shift in their approach.
Right. Absolutely. Well, there's no doubt in looking at the P&L of an advisory firm, the largest expense are your people, your compensation, benefits, all of that. And so maximizing that investment, I guess, is one of the ways that I look at it, makes good logical sense. And I sort of, to talk about how to make that shift, I sort of like to think of it as having process and structure around that valuable asset. Almost in some cases too, the financial planning process or your investment process, there are steps to it. There are procedures, there's checklists, there's follow-up. The same type of approach needs to apply to how you recruit, develop, and retain talent. And I feel that's kind of the shift, is that the shift is creating this structure, which in most firms is lacking for good reason. Started off with just a few people, grew over time, added a few more. The next thing you know, you wake up and you've got 6, 8, 10 employees, and now it's gotten a little bit more confusing and challenging to manage. So the idea of having more structure and process in place is also super fundamental to building a practice or a business that's actually transferable and has monetary value. And so this is the other piece to it, is that waking up and realizing, wow, there's really a business here. The more structured, the more process and procedures you have in place, the more value you create for your clients and actually for this business that you've created or you're involved in or a partner in. And so I think it's this idea of structure and process that doesn't come intuitively. It does when we're talking about financial planning. It does when we're talking about investment management. But when we're talking about the people side of it, I don't think that's quite as intuitive necessarily. I don't typically run into firms that view their people, exactly as an expense and wanting to cut corners around that, or, it's very rare I ever get a call where somebody's like, okay, I'm paying my people too much. I don't want to pay them this much. Right. It's more from the mindset of, I want to make sure I'm paying people competitively and I don't lose them because they're that valuable to me. So I think in our industry, firms get it. They understand it. It's just, how do you structure it? How do you put all that process in place?
Really, really smart. Where are some of the areas that you've seen RIAs and broker-dealers struggle the most? And kind of by extension, the broker-dealers who are interacting with some of these RIA firms that are custodying their assets there. You mentioned that talent costs are always at the top, at the largest expense line item, and that the owner's usually looking to maximize the ROI on that, right? They're looking to get a lot out of their talent. They to your point, they're not looking to cut corners. They're looking to make sure that it's the most vibrant relationship possible. Where are some of the areas that you see them struggling the most?
Yeah, great question. And I do work with, RIAs, hybrids. I do have clients that are part of a broker-dealer network. So, these things do cross all those different, if we want to think of them almost as different business models, sure, or business structures. So I think the key is, it really relies around, when it comes to compensation, that is typically why someone will pick up the phone and reach out. It's right now, I would say, compensation and career track development, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. And so those are the areas that I think they are struggling the most with. Around compensation, it gets back to this kind of concept of structure. And what I mean by that is, firms have kind of, the comp structures evolved over time for maybe where they came from before, or, trying to keep it simple. And over time it's become more complicated, but it's sort of evolved. And across the board, what I seem to see missing is just a real transparency and clearly articulating why the people are being paid what they're being paid today, and what the opportunity is to make more money as their career progresses or they take on additional responsibility. And I think the millennials, who are obviously making up the majority of the new entrants into the workforce, and by the same token, advisory firms, there's much more of a need and desire to understand how that progression is going to look, and wanting more of things clearly articulated and spelled out for them. And for a lot of firms, that's not something that has evolved. I mean, they've sort of just kind of made it up as they go along. And
Right.
so that's the struggle now is, and I think for a lot of folks, on the media and whatnot, everybody wants to blame everything on millennials, right? Oh, it's those darn millennials. Well, I actually defend them because I think what they're asking for is very reasonable. They want to understand why they're being comped the way they are, what their job and responsibilities are, how they're going to be evaluated, and what's going to move them forward in their career. And the emphasis on career and title equates to compensation. So being really clear and transparent and being able to explain, okay, well, this is why you're where you are today. And this is, how we move someone or progress their compensation higher is really critical. And I think that's where most firms struggle, is being able to really articulate why they're paying where they are, and more importantly, how people make more money.
That's a really insightful observation and something that you discovered there, because if most of these cases, these businesses are relatively small, and the firm probably hasn't hired that many people, right, over the course of their existence. They gradually grow organically, and they're adding one person here, another person here, and then historically in this industry, people kind of stick, right? They stay for a while. They're not hopping from one firm to another firm super quickly, as you might see in other industries. And so kind of as an extension of, or as a byproduct of that, there's an experience gap. And there's also, I think, just in my experience of looking around, there's a bit of a gap in what's happening in other industries. So you mentioned the millennials. Millennials have lots of options to work in a variety of industries, and not being mindful of what is available to them elsewhere can hinder your success as an RIA firm or as an individual RIA advisor looking to start growing by adding your first subordinate, if you will.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm hearing a lot is connected to that is, it's this compensation and then very quickly want to go to career track.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to, what they're doing is they're trying to explain their current compensation structure by, well, but you can make more money and then here's the career track. And although I intellectually understand that approach or argument, if you will, people want to know why they're making what they're making today and how what is this based on as a baseline of where am I going? But I think what I'm seeing right now is this effort to want to say, well, over time you can make X. And well, then you back yourself into a corner over how much time,
Mm-hmm.
what are all the different boxes you need to check for someone to advance and progress in their career. And what about the person that doesn't want to be you? What about the person that's really satisfied being an awesome client service admin or a really awesome paraplanner who doesn't want to run the firm one day? We still need to be able to help them understand compensation and what their opportunities are. So that to me seems to be the biggest struggle right now. That and, how to deal with millennials, which I just feel is kind of a silly, a silly complaint in a way. And because again, it just, for me, gets back to, well, you just need to have some structure and you need to be able to guide and provide, I call it just-in-time feedback.
Sure.
Millennials aren't going to wait until the end of the year to find out they didn't do something well in February.
Right.
That just isn't going to work.
Well, and it's really interesting to say that because, the average age of an advisor now is 55 years old. Or half of all advisors are 55 plus. you see that there is a very big cultural gap, right, between your senior advisor or the owner of the firm in many cases and the millennial who's younger in the firm. And for a variety of reasons. I mean, you've got a generation of people who grew up before the internet, entered the industry before the internet was a thing, right? And then you've got this other generation who's like, they've never known a world without the internet. Many of them have never known the world without a smartphone in their hands.
Right.
And there's some expectations there, right? One generation entered the workforce during maybe the 70s, but the 80s, right? And they've grown up in a certain way with some stability, even though they've seen some severe down markets and some great bull markets. Another generation has entered the marketplace when there's been a lot of tumult, right? A lot of just craziness. And they've seen moms and dads and aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa lose money and have lots of problems. They've seen firms not have the loyalty that they had in the past. So those people are going to have more questions. They're going to have a different mindset. And to the point, what you're doing is really helping bridge that gap in a very important way, I think.
Well, it's so interesting you say that. I agree with everything you said, like having all these different generations and then, all of us bringing to work every day those experiences that have shaped us. When we went to school, what was happening socially. And one of the things that I'm trying to really emphasize with clients and in some of my writing is to start really for those newer entrants into our industry is to talk about the opportunity if they're interested in going the advisory path, that it's an apprenticeship type of thing. It's not something, build the expectation from day one that you're not going to become an advisor, overnight, that it's something that does require experiencing different situations with clients over time to gain the knowledge that you need. It's not just about getting your CFP, it's the knowledge and experience that goes with that. But also being willing along that career path for the newer entrants to give them exposure, literally from day one to your clients. I mean, if you sit them in a room, having them bang out, financial plans or do more of that para-planner work. And it takes them 2 or 3 years to actually sit in a client meeting. They're going to get bored and they're not going to stick around.
Right.
That's just the bottom line. And I know I've heard from a lot of firms, well, we had to pay our dues. And do you know how long, Kelly, it took me before I ever became an advisor? And I'm like, yeah, well, that was how many years ago? That wasn't just yesterday, not trying to be mean. Right. But technology has changed. To your point, the internet, everything is happening so quickly. Information can be accessed much more quickly. Knowledge can transfer much, much more quickly. Let's not have this mindset that it happened for me in a certain way and that's how it's going to happen.
Well, to build on what you just said there, sorry to interrupt it. To build on what you just said there, again, it is a relationship business, right? Your clients are paying you for a relationship. They're paying you for insights, and you are hiring and spending money on these young advisors because at some point in time, you want them to be independent enough to run their own book, if you will, right? To run their own mini business within your business. The faster you get them talking to clients, the faster you get them pedaling on their own and get the training wheels off, the better.
Absolutely. I can't agree more. But there is this mind shift that has to take place. And it's really important if you're going to be able to explain to your clients as your hair is getting grayer, to your point, you say, 55 years or older, your clients are going to ask you about it. So you've got to have this transition plan. You have to have the development plan in place for your firm because clients are going to be asking about it. Mm. And I think as long as, getting back to giving folks an opportunity to at least sit in on meetings, as long as you explain to the clients and who they are and what the role is, I don't think clients are going to think that's a crazy idea. I think they're going to feel like, wow, there's more people behind the scenes here than I knew about that are all looking out for me,
Agreed.
So I think that's a really important part of it.
That's fantastic. So let's kind of bring it on home with connecting what you're doing with kind of what we're doing here with Truelytics, right? Our goal is to help financial advisors and wealth management firms increase the value of their business, and then to help them eventually transition that business when the time comes, right? Whether it's helping with succession planning or getting them ready for that, and a transition via M&A, right, for your acquisition. Whether they're on the sell side or the buy side in that equation. So how do we connect the dots with investing and managing talent effectively to the goals of improving a firm's valuation or setting it up for a seamless transition down the road in your mind? What do you think some of those elements are?
Sure. And you're absolutely right. There are different transition options, right? So there's a continuum is the way I think about it, from, hiring a successor, acquiring a successor, to, the more complex, which would be selling your business externally. You can merge, you can acquire a firm, you can have an internal successor. Any of those options, depending on where you are, age-wise, are viable. Some become less viable the older you are to begin this process. And so I think for all of them, back to this, your most important asset, your people, having the structure around recruiting, how you go about recruiting, who you bring into the firm, how you create a role definition around formalizing job descriptions, having goals and objectives and measuring people's performance on an ongoing basis, how that ties, what we talked about earlier, how that ties to compensation and opportunity to grow if you have an incentive plan. So paying some variable comp on top of base salary. Being able to really have that structured and articulated as a way to create career tracks and to recruit and retain people in. All of that structure is going to help you, regardless of which transition option you decide to pursue. And all of it is going to help in the valuation of the firm. Now, I'm not a valuation expert, which is what makes this a nice partner podcast. But it's if your most important asset are your people, because of the relationship they have with your clients, then it makes sense to me that being able to evaluate the people on your team and have them be core to your strategic plan and your success is going to increase the valuation of your firm. I have a client right now who is looking to sell externally. It wasn't his first choice. His first choice was to go down the track of internal successors. That did not work out. Frankly, he didn't have enough runway in front of him to make that internal succession plan work. But the most important thing for the firm that is going to be acquiring his business is to sit down with the employees. They want to retain all of them. They want to know who they are. That's what they're buying the clients, but the clients are only going to come if the employees come, if the employees stay with the firm. So it's so key to the retention of clients is the people piece. So to me, the structure that you put in place and having real processes around the different components of managing your talent is really only going to, it'll do nothing more than increase the value of your firm, which we know is an important thing.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That, you often talk about in this industry that, another advisor or another firm is not going to come in and buy assets in the classic business sense. They're not buying a building or machinery or patents, right? Or a brand name. Well, they could be buying a brand name to some extent, but what they're really buying is client relationships. And they're hoping that those client relationships, which come with the AUM and the fees that are generated off those assets, they're hoping that those things stay for a very long time because they're buying a cash flow that's generated from those assets. And the thing that makes that cash flow work is the people that had relationship with those clients. And if those people are not going to stick around or are not high quality, and you were the only person holding down the fort, keeping those assets sticky, could be a problem if you sell that business. So I think it's really, really important, as you mentioned, to make sure you've invested wisely in your talent.
Well, and to just follow up on that too, if you think about, selling externally, depending on where you are and your age, you may not want to have that be involved in that beyond a certain time frame. So maybe it's a year, maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years. I'm sure it's not going to be 10. So how's that going to happen? That's going to happen by the people in your team that you've transitioned those relationships to. So the structural piece becomes transitioning clients over time to the advisors that, you've brought on board and you've trained to take over the relationships. And that's another place where I see firms get stuck, not to go back to an earlier question you asked me, but I will anyway. And that is that they aren't transitioning clients and they aren't creating the capacity for themselves. And in some respects, almost, I don't want to say putting themselves out of a job, but if your goal is to externally hire and make that exit in a shorter period of time, that's exactly what you need to do with your org chart and the people, in your firm, is create that capacity and start to transition those relationships, sooner rather than later.
Well, it's interesting. We often talk about that here at Truelytics in frame of teaching advisors to think of their business as a business and not think of it as a practice, as client relationships that they themselves own, right? And unfortunately, many advisors grow their business in a way that's like it's a job that they own. Right. Versus it's a business. And in a real business, as you grow the business, the founder or the leaders of the business will start to pull back away from day-to-day client engagement and start thinking about strategic client acquisition, about developing the talent. All right. And all the other elements that you would have in running any other business in the world. Right. They will probably, stay involved in the really, really high value clients. But on the smaller clients, they will transition those to other advisors because that's the only way they grow. That's the only way that they make sure the business it has a longevity to it, long life, and also that the business has value to somebody who may want to acquire it someday.
Exactly. And that's why when you think about career tracks and progression, it's like, well, number of clients, things like, okay, transitioning those clients from one advisor to another, and really having a clear path laid out for how that's going to happen. I mean, that's a really a very important aspect, because if you've got an advisor who has way too many clients, and I don't know, it depends on the firm and the business model, but that's going to be, I guess, a red flag potentially if you are looking to find an external buyer, because it will suggest you haven't really institutionalized your processes, right, which takes away from the value of your firm.
I agree wholeheartedly. One of the things you mentioned earlier, you mentioned older advisors, and kind of sometimes it could be a scenario where they're too late for a certain type of succession or transition planning. What are some of the things that you recommend to an older advisor who's like, oh, I think I want to retire in the next couple of years. What do? I really haven't put anything into a place. What are some of the things that you might say to, number one, help them recognize that maybe they're resisting retiring, right? But the reality is you will retire whether you like it or not, right? Like,
I know.
You'll do so voluntarily, or Father Time will tell you it's time, right? How do you kind of help an older advisor with some of those, either prepare when they're not prepared, they've late to the game preparing, or maybe recognize that like it's time to start preparing?
Right. Well, and I have to say, I've been really blessed with my clients because you would think just based on the age that most of my clients would be the older, haven't done all these things they needed to do. But, thanks to podcasts and all the information that's out there, I've had a number of, younger advisors starting out their firm that are already thinking about all these structures, all the structure ideas and wanting to put it in place now. And they may only be in their late 30s, early 40s and don't see it off for a while, but they're already building it like a business so that they have options. And maybe they want to, I've had several clients who are true entrepreneurs, and they're like, I want to get this up and running, and I want to build the succession plan, and then I want to move on to the next business I want to build, So, but I think for the older advisors that haven't put a plan in place, it does take things like potentially an internal succession a bit off the table, because it takes time and energy to develop a number of potential internal successors who that have the mindset and want to run the business, and also who want to buy you out. So there's the financial aspect of that as well. So that's where I think some of the strategies around, merging with another firm and being, committed to staying on board for some transitional period, and then the deal structure is according, to what that time frame looks like, probably, makes the most sense. Finding a partner who shares your values and their similarity in structure and how you approach your clients, so that the transition for the clients can be smooth as well, is really probably more realistic, depending on how short that time horizon is to wanting to completely exit the business. And, I always also say, I don't think it's ever too late to bring in new talent. I think it's a little more challenging to bring in experienced advisors to some extent, but I have worked with a number of firms who have hired advisors who are experienced and senior and can bring some of their own clients or assets with them, and then combining that together with the succession plan in place. And again, maybe it's a 5-year time horizon, but that's certainly much better than, not having any kind of a plan and then, letting life take over. Right. Life takes over as your plan, as you say. So but I do think it's a challenge. I think that's why we see, and you're a much better expert on this than I am, but I think that's why we see some of these, I'm going to call them external players, coming into the industry and buying up advisory firms. And starting to see, private equity come in and funding some of the transactions, because we haven't planned well collectively as an industry. Right. And it is, that this first and second generation are aging, and they're at an age where they built these great businesses or practices, and they want to actually reap the benefits before it's too late for them. Like my client I mentioned, he wants to enjoy life and travel, and not necessarily have to be tied to the clients every day, and frankly, he's earned it. Right. He's done an amazing job for his clients. He's built a nice business and wants to exit out in a way that has the employees secure, his clients secure, and himself.
That's fantastic. Well, this has been fantastic, Kelli. I thank you so very much for sharing your insights and guidance here. I can absolutely see why your clients are as successful as they are and working with you. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you? Are they able to follow you, the website, social media? What is the best way if somebody wanted to find out a little bit more about you and the Cruz Consulting Group? What's the best way?
Yeah, well, please just email me. Maybe that's kind of old-fashioned.
It works. Everybody has email. It's a killer app still.
It's Kelli with an I, Kelli at cruzconsultinggroup.com. I am on Twitter, so you can follow me there, LinkedIn. If you go to our website, we do have a newsletter. We call it Talent Wealth, but you can certainly keep track of our thought leadership and what we're doing through our newsletter. And just reach out to me. I love talking to folks. If I can squeeze you in, if you've got a question you want to ask, I love to hear what's on the minds of folks. And you don't have to, it doesn't necessarily have to be a consulting gig, meaning, if I can do it back and forth on email or we do a quick call, I'm happy to help. I like to hear what's on people's minds because, I'm a constant learner. So that's how I learn and keep myself updated as well.
Perfect. This has been fantastic. Well, thank you so very much, Kelli. I hope lots of business come your way. And thank you again for joining us on the show. Thanks
so much, Mike. It was a pleasure.
All right. A huge thanks to Kelli Cruz once again for joining us on the show today. I know I got a lot out of this episode and the wisdom that she shared from her experience in the industry. Hopefully you did as well. Hopefully you can apply some of the things you learned and increase the talent assets under management value that you have there, that talent wealth that you're building up in your business. And then, of course, hopefully that increases the valuation of your business. And at some point in time, when you're ready, helps you be better set up for a transition of your business, whether that's selling the business to an external buyer or planning for succession for internal transition to those team members that you've been developing, that talent wealth you have in-house. As always, please do like and share this podcast with others. That's my one little ask, right? Share it with one colleague. Send them a little email, go, hey, you got to check out this podcast, Valuations Podcast by Truelytics. Getting a lot out of it. Check it out. Make sure you like the podcast on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, if you like. And then, of course, head on over to iTunes and SoundCloud and so forth to make sure you've subscribed and click the little like button as well there and help other people discover the podcast. And as always, send your questions in. If you have questions for us or you have topics you'd like to see us cover, send those into valuations@truelytics.com and we'll be sure to get back to you. Okay? Hopefully you have a good day and we'll talk to you soon on the next Valuations Podcast. Have a good day. Bye.